Bernie DeSantis III is the owner of Insignia Training Partners, a full-service learning and development company specializing in outsourced or fractional training services for businesses. Put another way, Insignia is a training broker. He understands that success is not merely about money and numbers, but about building meaningful relationships and consistently delivering exceptional service. If you see Bernie on the streets, you will know it is him by his epic mustache. Seriously, he is probably twisting and training his stash like a cartoon villain right now. Let's see what makes Bernie so buzzworthy. Welcome to the show, Bernie. How are you doing today?
Fantastic, Michael. How are you?
I am doing well. And how is your mustache doing today?
Mustache is doing well. I'm having a good stash day. No complaints.
There you
No
go.
complaints. Yes, doing what I want.
There you go. Who was it that I think it was Tombstone, and they all had mustaches, the big curly mustaches.
Yeah.
And one of the actors says it's a mustache that wears a man.
Indeed.
That's how epic their mustaches were to them. So that's amazing. How long have you been growing this?
So I've been growing this thing for 8 years. It's an ode to my grandfather. He had an epic mustache as well. And roughly about 5 years ago, he passed. And so my family asked me to give his eulogy, which I obliged and did. It was about halfway through, and at the back of the room, I saw 3 people walk in that I didn't know who they were. So I finished up my eulogy. I went to the back of the room. I introduced myself, and I asked them how they knew my grandfather. And they shared with me that they had worked with him 40 years prior at the Better Made Potato Chip Factory here in Michigan. And when they found out he had passed, they wanted to come and pay their respects to the best boss they ever had and see his big, beautiful mustache one more time. So from that moment on, I was like, I can never take this thing off.
There you go. I love it. I love it. So, so how long have you had your business, Insignia?
So I've been the owner for just shy of 3 years. January 1st of 2022 was when I bought the company. But I worked within it as a learning consultant, contract facilitator, and then throughout COVID, a virtual producer for about 5 years.
Oh, wow. And so, okay, so normally I'm interviewing people who are founders. And so this is a unique position that I'm in to talk to somebody who's actually bought an existing business. And so if you don't mind, I want to ask a couple of questions around this just out of my curiosity. Did you own a business before you bought this business?
So I had kind of loosely started to build my own consulting business under Insignia Training Partners. They were my main and really only client at the time. So I started to go down the process of building out my LLC, but then had a conversation with my predecessor that led me here.
And so what made you decide to buy the business then?
Well, it honestly, it really all stemmed from my love of learning and development. I've been doing this for a little over 20 years now. Got my start at Quicken Loans back in the day as a mortgage banker. Realized pretty quickly that I didn't want to smile and dial and make 100 phone calls a day, and had an opportunity to become their very first leadership development trainer. And my role there was in experiential learning. So I was doing ropes courses and SWAT team trainings, or developing these full day kind of activity based missions for my clients, for the up and coming leaders of the organization. And after these events, I would have people coming up to me and telling me, the impact that it had on them, and how it changed their lives or their perspective in so many different ways. And that was really what lit my fire for learning and development. And when I came to the realization that, I could run and own a business doing the exact thing that I love all of the time, it was really a no-brainer for me. And I had the opportunity to really create a great relationship with my predecessor as well. And she, basically handed over the keys to the kingdom of a fully functioning learning and development company. So an offer I couldn't refuse.
So so let's talk about this, because there's a lot of ways you can call something a training company. So what specifically do you train, and how do you do it?
Great question. So the way that I explain Insignia, and my predecessor did as well, is we are a fractional learning and development company. We provide outsourced resources to organizations to help them fill gaps in their learning and development teams. So as an example, we work with Chewy, the pet food company.
Mm-hmm.
They designed their own leadership development program internally, but they lacked the resources to actually train the courses and coach the participants. So they
Mm.
contracted out to Insignia. We provided them with 3 facilitators and 4 leadership coaches that effectively ran their program for them for over 8 months while they staffed up internally to be able to take it on themselves. And that's really um, very much how we operate with all of the clients that we work with. We provide them with the resources that they don't have, sometimes on a short-term basis, sometimes on a very long-term basis. So they don't have to add in the overhead necessarily themselves to execute whatever that training is that they're looking to do.
So you're the one, not necessarily creating the training, but facilitating the training.
We do all parts and pieces of learning and development. That particular case with Chewy, we just provided the facilitation and the coaching. But as an example, right now, we're also working through another organization with Delta Airlines to help them build out their leadership program. And we provide them with 2 instructional designers to build out content and a learning LMS administrator who helps them to manage the digital content in their learning management system.
Oh, that's amazing. That sounds like a lot of fun, except that you have to work with a airline. Are they ever on time for their meetings? Because they never seem to take their planes never seem to take off on time. Anyway, I digress. So now you said a lot about leadership training, but now
Mhm.
is leadership training the predominant thing that you develop and deliver, or are there other types of trainings you guys
Yeah,
specialize
great question. We get approached a lot about leadership development programs. This day and age, the top 2 reasons that people leave an organization is poor leadership or poor onboarding.
in?
So we get approached oftentimes by for leadership development programs from companies that may be experiencing a lot of attrition. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things that they attack is, how are our leaders leading? Right. So we'll do those type of training programs, but it could quite literally be anything: onboarding, systems training, a new product or process that a company's rolling out. So change management. And again, all of the parts and pieces that go into training and enablement for an organization that could look like coaches or a fractional chief learning officer to build out strategy around a particular subject matter or topic, or holistically for the entire organization. We provide the resource that they need, whatever that might be in the world of learning and development.
Gotcha. And so, when you're doing these now, can you said fractional? So, is it a point where you actually train the new trainers in house? So might not have had the team, but they wanted to implement the training, and now you get to train the trainers.
Yes, exactly. So there are cases where a company will outsource train the trainer activities to us to train their in-house team directly. So one of the big places that we've been playing, particularly since COVID, is in the world of virtual training, right? Everybody had to
Mm,
go virtual. Not everybody is doing it well.
mm,
So we've developed a 12-week program where we will come in and spend an hour to an hour and a half each week with an organization to teach them how to facilitate virtually and have really engaging, smoothly run events. You can scroll LinkedIn for 5 minutes right now and find a dozen master classes that you can go to. And my number, 9 out of 10, it's probably going to suck because it's just a talking head on screen.
yes, and I think that virtual presentations are hard for people because they don't have that human interaction when they're making those recordings. So I think there's a lot of I almost feel like they should maybe have some acting classes for people. It's like,
Well, there are a lot of actors that show up, and unfortunately, the actor that they're trying to be is Ben Stein, right, from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Just unfortunately, they don't bring a lot of energy to the virtual environment. You come into an in-person training program, and there's always a lot of energy. There's movement. People are excited and happy to
Mhm,
be there. But you come to a virtual, and like me as an example, right now I'm sitting down in front of my computer. Well,
mhm,
you immediately half your energy the moment that you sit down, and
mhm,
people don't think about that energy and that delivery. And so
right,
that's one of the things that we really focus on and teach them, is that you need to be conscious of how you are engaging with your audience and how you're presenting yourself, because you
right.
have to have some energy, you have to have some life, otherwise people are going to disengage.
And I feel like virtual. So I was in the Air Force for 10 years, and in the beginning, when I was doing my on the job training, we ended up in what they called back then computer based training,
Yeah,
CPTs.
CBT. Yep.
Yes. And I'm sure that's what they still call them, but back in the day, they were bad.
Mhm.
And we always game the system of like, how little of the content can we consume and still pass the quiz so that we can get out of there, right? How do is it's an art, right? Like training virtual, especially specifically for, I mean, or especially I should say with virtual, because like you are not you can't see the person reacting to what you've created, right? Over and over, you can only say, you can only tell how much they scrolled around, and, heat maps and stuff like that are definitely available. And then, did they actually, pass the quizzes or tests or certifications, whatever you're training on. So eh, how do you overcome that challenge of people really a lot of pushback to the training in itself? Like, not everybody wants to take leadership training. Like, oh, here
Right.
we go, you're gonna give me the raw Tony Robbins NLP blah blah blah, right? Like, you're like,
Yeah.
can I get
Yeah.
back to work? I got too many things to do. So
Yeah.
what's the trick, or what's the magic behind keeping it engaging and getting them to actually buy into consuming and retaining that type of information?
Well, I'll start by saying there's very few leaders out there who will be like, yo, I need help on my leadership, right? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. But the unfortunate reality is that, a lot of organizations will escalate their top performers in whatever the role is to
Mhm.
now lead a team, but then not give them the tools and resources to be able to effectively lead that team.
Mm.
So one of the first things that you have to look at when you are creating an e-learning, right? That's the transition from CBT to what we call it today as e-learning, is looking really at the content. I am, like you, one of those guys where if it's an e-learning that I can click the button and get all the way through just to get to the assessment and pass it at the lowest level possible, and this is coming from a learning and development guy, I am that guy, right? But it's really about what's in it for me as a learner, and how do we keep them truly engaged with that content, and what's the benefit going to be for them. A lot of folks now are using AI simulations, which are a great way to keep people engaged because there's always something happening. You're not
Mm.
just watching a video, you're not just clicking the buttons, you actually have to do something. And
Mm.
the other way is through gamification, right? Actually making it somewhat fun to go through that training program. And if you can make it fun for somebody, they're actually enjoying their time learning something. It's really easy actually to teach them whatever it is that you're trying to teach them. But the subject matter in and of itself is very important as well, right? Because if we're talking about regulatory and compliance, right, that's just
Mm.
boring subject matter to begin with. But if
Mm.
you can gamify that, show people that it's actually fun to learn about compliance and regulatory issues, they are more likely to absorb that information. But I'm a firm believer that if it's something where there is a human element involved in the thing that they need to do, it should be done live and in person, or at least virtually, right? But still live.
Mm.
Um, I would argue that really only subject matter that isn't going to change a lot over time or
Mm.
doesn't have a whole lot of subjectivity
Mhm.
should be done through e-learning.
You're reminding me of a project I did back when my business was a media production house. And this gentleman, this is back when video teleconferencing had just started, and like you had to have a lot of money, like the cheapest out there. That was made by Cisco, a company called Cisco.
Yeah.
It's like $20,000, and then you had to spend another $10,000 for an implementer.
Yep.
Somebody to install it, teach everybody how to use it, and then do the technical support behind it, because people don't know how to use all this equipment, right? And so we got hired to create the training videos that the users would watch. So as an end user, and we had to teach them etiquette for VTC and all these other things. And so we came up with this concept of basically setting it up like a Law and Order episode. You remember that
Nice.
show?
Yep.
And you know how they had the timestamp? So it was like
Yep.
5 a.m., blah, 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 buzzy, blah. And so we had those, and we had the little dong dong and everything. We had the whole 9 yards.
That's
And
fantastic.
we did episodic segments of the training. And it was all like basically wrapped around this VTC happening in 4 different places in different time zones, the whole nine. And so you had the people doing all the wrong things and then having them get corrected and all this other stuff. And so the problem with that now, I look back on it, is that there's generations who don't know what Law and Order is.
No idea what that is.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I always found it that like the entertainment factor definitely keeps people engaged because you're telling a story. So you're instructing through story, right? And anybody who went through that training will always remember that training as much as I remember making that training, because it was a production, right?
Absolutely.
And but now we have such a short attention to I'm sorry, I can't talk all of a sudden. Attention span, right? Like we don't grasp on. Like somebody said that the other day, like we have a shorter attention span than goldfish.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, holy
Accurate.
it's like,
Accurate.
which is good for a golfer because then you can be the goldfish. But the but then on top of that, so we have all this noise going around, and now you're telling people to sit down and pay attention to this information and ingest it and use it and then go practice it, right? But then you have generational gaps in the same workforce where, I mean, you have now companies that have 3 to 4 different generations all in the same organization, and 2 to 3 of those generations are the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
How do you gap those generational communication styles in, say, something as simple as e-learning?
That's a really good question, and one honestly that is ever evolving, right? Because as we continue to figure things out, new generation is coming into the workforce that has a completely different way of wanting to be trained or wanting to consume that information. So, really the answer at this point, Michael, is that, you have to have components of what every generation ultimately wants. The current generation that's coming in, they are the TikTok generation, right? They like that tiny little snippet of information. So now we create micro learnings that are 2 to 5 minute segments that just focus on one very specific actionable skill set that they can work on, right? But maybe for the older generations, they like to have a little bit more engagement. They want to, have a little bit of a chat and have some coffee while they're learning something. So maybe as opposed to an e-learning, it is a 30-minute webinar that you do, right? So they can sit there and they can sip their coffee and they can listen and they can interact a little bit. It's different strokes for different folks ultimately, right? And not everyone has or prefers the same learning styles. Learning styles as a kind of a general umbrella has kind of been debunked at this point, but there's still some validity to the different learning styles that are outlined in there, right? You have your visual, you have your auditory, you have your kinesthetic, and then you have your readers. And so you need to be able to impact all of those different styles throughout any training that you're doing. You have to have the different components because everybody learns in one of those ways or multiple of those ways. And so you have to be willing to integrate all of them at any given time in any given training in any different format.